Okay, today we're looking at Module 3, Lesson 17, drawing the coordinate plane and points on the plane. So we're continuing with exactly what we've been working on, labeling and numbering our x-axis, labeling and numbering our y-axis. But we're going to do something a little differently today and go a little crazy. You've been currently working on the opening exercise on page 63, where you were asked to label your x and y axis. Everybody point to the x for your x axis. If you want to highlight it to make sure that you have it there, you can do that as a reminder, because I am telling you now, boys and girls, you will lose points on a test, a quiz, a midterm, a final if you don't label your x and y axis. Okay? If you want to label the quadrants, that's optional. And number your number line, making sure you're numbering the lines, not the spaces. Okay, then you had to plot the points on your x and y axis. I said if you wanted to label your points, A, B, C, D, and E, F, and G, to make it easier, you may do so, and you could do that on your homework too. So let's take a look at your answers. So A was up here, B is here, C I just labeled as A. I should probably put my glasses on for this. D and E, F, and G. So instead of writing the ordered pairs, if you want to write the letter, that's fine. Any questions on labeling any of those points? Okay, so put your pencils down for a minute, and let's have a Throwback Thursday. All right, Throwback Thursday. Do you remember earlier in the school year, in science, you looked at different types of graduated cylinders? For this smaller graduated cylinder, the 5 is marked, and there are 5 tick marks to get to 5 milliliters. So what would be the interval? What does each smaller tick mark represent? 1. So this had a scale of 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's take a look at the middle graduated cylinder. I guess that one was for Mama Bear. This one, we have the 10 labeled, and we have 5 tick marks to get to the 10. So what is my interval? 2. So this was 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. But now Papa Bear's graduated cylinder is labeled at 50, and we have 5 tick marks to get to 50, so my interval are 10. So 10, 20, 30, and that's much easier to number because the spaces are further apart, which is why I am making you new graph paper for your homework tonight, okay? So we had different scales for the different graduated cylinders. And continuing with our Throwback Thursday, when we did our double number lines, when we were trying to find percent of a number, if we wanted 25%, what was our interval? We made our double number line, we counted by 25, sure. But this time we wanted to find 40% of a number. Could we use intervals of 25? Would that work? No. So what was the interval on this double number line? 20. Sure. Same thing with number lines. What is the scale on this first number line? Sure. What's the interval on this number line? What does it go by? Or what are we counting by? 7. Yeah. What about this one? Careful. Not all the ticks are numbered. We're looking at the tick marks. So it's not 20s. What is it? Right, our interval here is 10s. They just didn't label them all. But remember, our interval goes by the tick marks. So what about this last one on the bottom? What does each tick mark represent? What's our interval? 4. Very good. Sorry, I turned my head and couldn't hear you. Okay. So we have choices. when we're making our number lines to label our x-axis and our y-axis, because really our x-axis is a horizontal number line and our y-axis is a vertical number line. Oh my God. All right, so let's continue to look. Look at example 2, which is on page 64. They gave you a nice big graph paper for a change. So before we go ahead and create our coordinate plane and set up our x-axis and our y-axis, let's take a look at our coordinates. So at the bottom of the page, you can write what I have over here on the left. What are my x coordinates? See, in this set of numbers, I have a -4, -3, 1, 6, and 9. So what is my largest number for my x coordinates? And what's my smallest number? So I have to go from -4 to +9. So what would be a good way to number my x-axis? Yeah, we could count by 1. So your scale would be 1. Don't label yours yet. So here is my x-axis, and I decided that counting by 1s would cover my whole set of numbers. Are all of my x coordinates labeled on my x-axis? All right, good. So now let's take a look at our y coordinates. My y coordinates are 20, 35, -35, 10, and -40. So what's my largest number for my y coordinates? 40. And what's my smallest? 35. Very good. Good catch. Good catch. So 35 is my largest number. And what's my smallest number? All right, so put your pencils down for a second and take a look at the board, please. I have to go from 35 to -40. So that has an absolute value of 35. That has an absolute value of 40. That's 75 spaces. I don't know about you, but that would be a really big piece of graph paper, and I don't feel like numbering 70 spaces on my y-axis. So instead of numbering 75 spaces on my y-axis, what would be a better scale to use? What would be a better scale? Instead of counting by 1s, let's use a scale of 5s. So 5, 10, 15, 20. Now wait a minute. Can I do that? Can I use a y-axis with a scale of 5 and an x-axis of a scale of 1? Can I use, because my last one, my x-axis was 1, and my y-axis was 1. Can I have 2 different scales on my coordinate plane? Yes. Yeah. Let's go crazy. Let's use 2 different scales. So now you may go ahead, and again, if you want to label these A, B, C, D, and E to make it easier, go right ahead. So to take a look at our answer, this is what your grid should look like, but you should have every line numbered. And that's where your points should be plotted. Okay? Let's take a look. Yes? And instead of writing the ordered pairs, you could have labeled each point with the letters that we already used. So let's take a look at the next example, example 3. Our x coordinates are 1/10, 5/10, -7/10, -4/10, and 8/10. So if I counted by 1s, all of my points would be crammed in a little spot. So what would be a better scale to use for my x-axis? Right, 0.1, which is tenths. And I always tell you to use the 0 as a placeholder, but this time I'll let you off the hook because you don't have a lot of room. So now let's take a look at our y coordinates. 4, 7, -5, 3, and 1. So what would be an appropriate scale to get me from -5 to +7? Whole number ones. Because if I counted by tenths, if I decreased my y-axis to tenths, I would need 70 spaces just to go from 0 to +7 if I counted by tenths. And that's just the top. So we can count by whole numbers, by ones. And it's okay to have a regular number line on my y-axis and a decreased number line for my x-axis. And we can label the points. So go ahead and label your x-axis, label your y-axis, number them, and plot those points. And you should have these notes at the bottom of the page. So if we took a look at what your answer should be, this is where the points are labeled. And again, you want to make sure that you label every line on the number line. I am going to email home graph paper. That's easier for your homework. So that is what your answer should look like for the second example.